Saint Augustine, Bishop and Doctor of the Church. Augustine was born on November 13, 354 AD, in Tagaste, near Souc Aras in Algeria, into the family of the state official patricius. His mother, Saint Monica, came from a Christian tradition and fervently desired her son to be baptized. However, this desire was fulfilled only after 33 years. Augustine's development was undoubtedly influenced by the fact that his father and mother differed in their faith and beliefs regarding matters that determine the fate of humans. As a result, Augustine remained torn between the influence of his mother and father for many years. Augustine was the eldest of the siblings, followed by his brother Navigius. Navigius converted at the same time as Augustine and was present at their mother's death. Navigius married and had several daughters, all of whom dedicated themselves to the service of God in a monastery. One of Augustine's sisters married and, after her husband's death, entered a monastery in Hippo, where she became the abbess. When she passed away in 424, Augustine wrote a rule for that monastery. Some manuscripts have Augustine's name as Aurelius, probably his nickname, though it is uncertain when he adopted it. At the age of 16, Augustine had to interrupt his education due to a lack of funds, despite his great talents. Learning came easily to him. He impressed his peers with an extraordinary memory. However, he recalled the first years of his education with distaste in his autobiography, Confessions. His teacher was harsh, punishing his students mercilessly for the slightest mistakes. Augustine disliked mathematics but delighted in Latin literature, with Virgil being his favorite author. As a young man, Augustine lived a carefree life, enjoying festivities, good food, and drink. He frequented the theater and had a penchant for childish pranks. The challenging period of adolescence, ample free time, and pagan customs led him to his first studies in Tagaste up to 366 and Majura 366 to 370. Subsequently, he pursued further education in Carthage, the metropolis of North Africa, where he became involved with a woman. This union resulted in the birth of his son, a Deodatus, Latin for given by God. Augustine lived with this woman for 15 years, indulging in spectacles, the circus, gladiator fights, and theater. These were his favorite pastimes. Under the influence of reading Roman classics, Augustine fell into rationalistic skepticism and began his quest for truth. He found the Bible primitive due to less than adequate Latin translations at the time. He joined the Manichaean sect, drawn in by the local bishop's eloquence and erudition. In 374, Augustine returned to Tagaste, opened his own grammar school, but closed it after 2 years to establish a rhetoric school in Carthage in 376 at the age of 22. After 7 years he moved to Rome, where he founded another school in 383. Learning that they were looking for a rhetorician in Milan, he immediately went there in 384. Milan was then the capital of the Western Roman Empire, the first city in Europe after Constantinople. Besides managing the school, Augustine had the duty of delivering speeches during state ceremonies in Milan. Augustine was 30 years old at the time. In Milan, he encountered Saint Ambrose, the bishop of the city at the time. Augustine began attending his sermons, impressed by Ambrose's eloquence and the depth of the content he conveyed. Shortly thereafter, he experienced a divine intervention in 386. One day, Augustine took up the letters of St. Paul the Apostle. By chance, he opened a passage from the letter to the Romans, "Let us live decently, as in the light of day, no orgies or drunkenness, no immorality or debauchery, no quarreling or jealousy. But take up the weapons of the Lord Jesus Christ, and stop worrying about satisfying your sinful nature. Romans 13:13.14. As Augustine wrote in his Confessions, he suddenly felt as if a stream of strong light pierced the dark night of his soul. He understood the purpose of his life and felt remorse for the wasted past. He continued as a rhetoric teacher until summer, then traveled to Casiciaco near Milan, a village where he spent time in prayer and discussions on evangelical topics with his friend Verecundus. Simultaneously, he immersed himself in reading the scriptures. At the beginning of Lent, he presented himself to Saint Ambrose as a catechumen, and, on Holy Saturday night, April 24–25, 387 AD, Augustine was baptized by Ambrose. He was 33 years old. Along with him, his son Deodatus and friend Alypius also received baptism. Augustine decided to return to Africa to convert his fellow citizens and bring them to Christ. Just before leaving Italy, his mother, Saint Monica, passed away in Ostia, and shortly after arriving in Africa, his son also died. Upon arriving in Tagaste, Augustine distributed his wealth among the poor and, with friends Saint Alypius and Evodius, lived together, dedicating themselves to prayer, discussions on religious matters, and the study of the scriptures. In 391, Augustine, along with his friends, went to Hippo, where he decided to establish a monastery and spend the rest of his life there. Soon he became known to everyone as a very devout man. Therefore, when Bishop Valerius asked the people to suggest a candidate for a priest who could assist him, everyone in the cathedral turned to Augustine, shouting, "Augustine for the priesthood." Overwhelmed with tears, he accepted the bishop and the people's proposal. After receiving ordination, he did not change his way of life, but continued to lead a communal life in the monastery. He even began accepting new candidates. This led to the establishment of a kind of seminary from which many African bishops emerged, including Saint Alypius, the bishop of Tagaste, and Augustine's close friend, Profuturus, the bishop of Sirte, Evodius, the bishop of Uzalis, and Augustine's friend, Severus, the bishop of Milov, Urban, the bishop of Sicya, Peregrinus, the bishop of Fahac, and Boniface. In a ceremony on the Feast of the Ascension in 394 AD, Bishop Valerius consecrated Augustine as his suffragan, much to the immense joy of the people. 2 years later, Valerius passed away 396 AD, and Augustine succeeded him as the bishop of Hippo. Augustine continued to lead a communal life, shaping future bishops and priests. After many years of experience, he composed a rule for them, which would later become the foundation for many religious orders, including the Augustinians, regular canons, Dominicans, and Paulins. Much of his time was occupied by correspondence, which he used not only as a form of social contact, but also as an opportunity for apostolate. Augustine corresponded with Saint Jerome, Saint Prosper, Saint John of Jerusalem, and Saint Paulinus of Nola, among others. Augustine waged an uncompromising battle against the errors plaguing the Church during his time: Manichaeism, 396–400, Donatism, 400–411, and Pelagianism, 411–430. He engaged in debates with Manichaeans, whom he knew personally because he was ideologically associated with them, for several years. He did not rest until he eradicated this heresy. In Augustine's time, the Donatists were the strongest in Africa. In 330 AD, they held as many as 270 bishoprics. Condemned at synods in Arles 313 and Milan 316, they entrenched themselves strongly in North Africa. As rigorists, they did not allow those who had denied their faith during persecutions and now sought to return to the Church, called lapsi, to be admitted to the ecclesiastical community. The Donatists demanded the harshest penalties for priests and faithful breaking the law, often resorting to violence. Augustine fought them with his writings and spoken word. However, he believed that bishops and priests who returned to the unity of the Church should be allowed to retain their offices. This stance won over some Donatists. The heresy was eventually defeated at synods in Carthage in 401 and 411. At the same time, Pelagius and Celestius arrived in Africa. They preached that the sin of Adam and Eve harmed only the first parents, not the entire human race. They claimed that children are born in a state of grace, and baptism is not necessary, and sanctifying grace is not necessary for salvation. This heresy provided Augustine with the opportunity to thoroughly explain the theological issue of sanctifying and actual grace and the problem of salvation, making him the first of the Fathers to do so. Towards the end of his life, Augustine experienced a tragedy. The Roman governor invited the Vandals to North Africa to defend against the wild Sahara tribes. When he realized that the Vandals were no less barbaric than the tribes, he declared war on them. However, it was too late. After their victory, the Vandals began occupying city after city. Hippo heroically defended itself for 3 months until the enemies breached the walls and caused a fire in the city. Augustine was no longer alive at that time. He died during the siege on August 28, 430 AD. The Vandals forcibly introduced Arianism. Martyrs' blood flowed abundantly. In 150 years, Africa fell under the hordes of the Arabs. Augustine's body was initially laid in the cathedral in Hippo. However, fearing desecration by the Vandals, it was later transferred to Sardinia and eventually to Pavia by King Liutprand, plus 744. To this day, the spiritual sons of the great bishop, the Augustinians, watch over his relics. After Augustine, there remain several dozen volumes of his writings. Among the most valuable are Confessions 386 to 387, on catechizing the uninstructed 395, on faith and the creed 396, and the City of God, books 22 413 to 427. His 363 sermons and 217 letters have been preserved. He rightfully earned the title of the greatest theologian of Christian antiquity. He is one of the 4 great doctors of the Western Church. The patron saint of the Augustinians, regular canons, Magdalenes, Carthage, printers, publishers, theologians. In the iconography, Saint Augustine is depicted in episcopal attire, sometimes as a monk. His attributes include an angel speaking into his ear, a child by the seashore pouring water into a basin, a book, a pastoral staff, a heart in his hand, a heart pierced by 2 arrows, a disciple, or a group of disciples.